My husband divorced me by text. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old babe. I've already emptied our joint account. I calmly replied, good luck, when he realized what I'd done. To it was already too late. The text arrived between helping customers at my boutique. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account. My hands didn't shake as I read it. My voice didn't waver as I helped Mrs. Peterson pick out a scarf. The only sign that my husband of years had just nuked our marriage via text was a slight tightening around my eyes. I waited until Mrs. Peterson left her purchase wrapped in our signature silver paper before typing my response. Good luck, my name is Claire, and at 38, I just received the most callous goodbye in history. But while Mark was probably gloating over his grand exit, imagining me in tears over his betrayal, I was calmly locking up my boutique for the day. The signs had been there for months, the late nights at work that never matched his pay deposits, the sudden password changes on his phone, the way he'd started going to the gym, religionly buying new clothes, trying to recapture his youth 3 months ago. I'd found a receipt for dinner for two at an expensive restaurant. On a night he'd claimed to be working late, that same evening I'd opened a separate bank account at a different bank a week later. When he mentioned wanting to combine our accounts to simplify things, I'd agreed cheerfully while moving my personal savings to the new account, the joint account he'd just emptied. It contained exactly enough to keep him from getting suspicious about 2 months' worth of regular deposits. The rest was safely tucked away, along with detailed records of every suspicious transaction he'd made over the past year. My phone buzzed again. Don't bother begging. Melissa and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Melissa, the new receptionist at his office. I'd met here at the company Christmas party, watched her laugh too loudly at Mark's. Jokes noticed how she touched his arm when she thought no one was looking. She was young enough to be his daughter, naive enough to think she was special. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I called my lawyer, the one I'd consulted 2 months ago when I'd found the hotel charges on her credit card statement. It's time, I said simply. He just made his move. The papers are ready. She replied, I'll file them first thing tomorrow. Do you want me to have him served in Miami? No rush, let them think he's won first. Another text from Mark. I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. My little shop, the successful boutique I'd built from scratch, the one that generated more income than his middle management position, the one whose profits I'd carefully kept separate from our joint finance. I smiled, thinking of the certified letters that would greet him in my amulet, him enjoy his moment of triumph. He spent that evening in our house, my houses, since I'd inherited it from my grandmother and kept it in my name. Despite Mark's repeated suggestions, towed him to the deed. Another lucky instinct that had paid off while organizing the paperwork my lawyer would need. I found our wedding album. Mark looked so different then, before his midlife crisis had turned him into a caricature of his former self these days. He wore shirts too tight for his softening middle, tried too hard to connect with the somethings at his office, used slang that sounded ridiculous. Coming from a man of 45, my phone kept buzzing with text from Himmick, one more condescending than the last. I've been planning this for months. Melissa understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine. Maybe you'll find someone more your own age already. Told my family, they agree, we grew apart. It's nobody's fault, really. I screenshotted each message, adding them to my evidence folder. Let him dig his hole deeper. My lawyer would love his casual ad of premeditation, his gleeful announcement about emptying our account. The last text caught my attention. BTW, I ed the joint card to book our flights, and hotel, consider it my parting gift. LOL, perfect. I called the credit card company, Mrs. Harrison speaking. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately. Of course, ma'am, can you identify the charges? 2 first-class tickets to Miami booked today, hotel charges at the Royal Palm, and I'll need to remove my husband as unauthorized. User, do you have documentation of the fraud? Text messages from my husband, admitting he used our joint card to book travel with his girlfriend after emptying our bank account. I'll be happy to forward them. The representative's professional tone couldn't quite hide her satisfaction as she canceled the charges. Mark and Melissa would arrive at the airport tomorrow to find their tickets invalidated. Their hotel reservation canceled. My phone buzz. Again, don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller. I actually laughed out loud at that one. Did he really think he had any claim to my grandmother's house? Had his ego grown so large that he'd forgotten whose name was on the deed? Another buzz, and I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half my half of my business that I'd built myself, funded myself, grown myself, while he complained about my long hours and called it my hobby. I poured a glass of wine, the good stuff I'd been saving. For a special occasion this qualified tomorrow, Mark would learn some hard truths about property law and separate assets, but tonight I'd enjoy the quiet and plan my next chapter. Morning brought a flurry of increasingly angry texts from Mark. What the heck did you do to our credit card? The airline won't honor our tickets. The hotel canceled our reservation, answer me. I silenced my phone and headed to my boutique. Friday was always our busiest day, and I had a new shipment of designer handbags to unpack. Life goes on even when your husband runs off with a receptionist, young enough to be his daughter around noon, his mother called Claire. Dear Mark told us everything about how controlling you've been, how you drove him away. He says, you're being vindictive? Now causing problems with High's travel plans. I put her on speaker while I arranged a window display, did he mention emptying our joint account, and charging tickets for him and his girlfriend on our credit card silence. Then, well, he said you left him no choice, that you'd been cold and distant, Barbara. I have his texts. Would you like me to read them to you? The one where he bragged about taking our money, or maybe the one where he mocked my age another. Pause, he did seem a bit cruel, I told him. The text. Message was inappropriate. I appreciate the call. Barbara, I've always liked you, but I think it's best if we end this conversation now. My lawyer has advised minimal contact with Mark's family during the proceedings. Proceedings already goodbye, Barbara. By late afternoon, Mark's sister Amanda was spreading family gossip through mutual friends. Apparently, Mark and Melissa were stuck at a budget motel near the airport. Their Miami dreams temporarily derailed. He tried using his personal credit cards and those had been maxed out for months. Another red flag. I noted my lawyer. Called with an update, the emergency hearing is scheduled for Monday. Given his admission of emptying the joint account and the documented credit card fraud, we're in a strong position to freeze all remaining assets. Has he been served yet? Not yet, but he'll get the papers at his new motel address, speaking of which his girlfriend's social media is providing excellent evidence. She's been posting about their adventure all day, including some choice comments about you. I smiled, thinking of my own documentation, a year's worth of suspicious charges, hotel receipts, text messages that proved premeditation. Mark had been so focused on his grand escape that he'd never considered I might be watching, waiting. Preparing, my phone buzzed with another text. You think? You're so smart. But I made copies of all the boutique financial records. Half that business is mine. I forwarded the text to me lawyer, adding it to the growing file of Mark's. Mistakes let him learn the hard way about separate assets and business ownership. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being prepared. The emergency hearing on Monday was everything I could have hoped for. Mark showed up in his new young wardrobe designer. Jeans too tight for his age, a blazer that screamed midlife crisis. Melissa waited outside, her youth painfully obvious under the harsh courthouse lighting my lawyer presented our evidence methodically. Mark's gleeful text about emptying our account, his credit, card fraud, his documented history of hidden expenses, each piece carefully collected over months of quiet observation. Your Honor, Mark, hastily hired lawyer, attempted my client admits to some rash decisions, but Mrs. Harrison's actions have been vindictive and calculating. Calculating? My lawyer countered. You mean prudent? My client protected her separate assets and maintained detailed records of her husband's suspicious behavior. That's not vindictive, that's smart business. The judge reviewed my documentation. The split property deed to the house, the boutique's incorporation papers in my name, only the careful separation of business and personal finances that Mark had always complained about Mr. Harrison. The judge addressed Mark directly. You admitted via text message to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend. Do you deny this? Mark shifted uncomfortably. I was just trying to make a clean break by committing financial fraud. The judge raised an eyebrow. And now you're claiming rights to property that documentation shows is clearly separate from marital assets. The business grew during our marriage. Mark's lawyer tried again. My client is entitled to, the business was established. Before them, Arridge, my lawyer, interrupted, and Mrs. Harrison maintained strict separation of business and personal finances. Throughout, we have documentation of every penny invested and earned. I watched Mark's face as reality started sinking, and he thought, this would be easy empty. Our accounts run off with his girlfriend, maybe claim half my business. In the divorce, he'd never bothered to understand my insistence on keeping. Things separate had mocked my careful bookkeeping as obsessive. The court finds sufficient. Evidence of financial misconduct, the judge announced. All shared assets are frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Harrison is ordered to return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. But that money's gone, Mark protested. We spent it on then. I suggest you find a way to replace it. The judge cut him off, and Mr. Harrison, the court, takes a very dim view of using shared credit cards to fund adventures with Paramore outside the courthouse. I heard Melissa asking Mark about their Miami plans. His response was lost in the sound of my heels clicking confidently across the marble floor. Heading back to the business he'd never understood or respected, at the next few weeks brought a string of increasingly desperate moves from Mark he tried claiming the boutique had been his idea. He remembered investing money in its early days. He even suggested he'd been my business partner all along. Claims quickly disproven by my meticulous records. Hune's getting desperate. My lawyer observed his girlfriends. Social media shows they staying at her studio apartment, now apparently living on a receptionist's salary, isn't quite the glamorous escape. He imagined Mark's family started reaching out their tone markedly different from their initial accusations. We had no idea. His sister Amanda admitted he told us you'd been cold controlling, that he needed to escape. But then we saw his text, the way he bragged about taking your money. That's not the brother. I thought I knew. His mother called again, this time in tears. The things he said about your age, about replacing you with someone younger. I raised him better than that, I thought. I did anyway. I let their calls go to voicemail. Their support might have meant something weeks ago, but now it felt like rats deserting. A sinking ship, the boutique thrived, ironically boosted by local gossip about my situation. Women started coming in specifically to show support, often leaving with far more than they'd planned to buy. My ex tried something similar. One customer confided while buying a designer handbag thought he'd take everything in the divorce. Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them. My phone still buzzed occasionally with texts from Mark Histone, swinging between anger and manipulation. You've ruined everything. It never meant to hurt you. You regret being so vindictive. Can't we work something out? That business would be nothing without my support. I forwarded each message to my lawyer without responding. Let him dig his hole deeper through the grapevine, I heard. Melissa was having second thoughts, apparently, sharing her studio apartment with a middle-aged man who couldn't afford his own place. Wasn't the romantic adventure she'd imagined? The age gap that had seemed exciting during secret hotel meetings felt different. In the harsh light of reality, she posted about toxic relationships and learning from mistakes. Yesterday, my lawyer mentioned during an update call and removed her relationship status this morning. I almost felt sorry for Mark, but then I remembered his, after telling me he'd emptied our account, the casual cruelty of his comments about my age, the way he'd assumed I'd be helpless without him. Instead of pity, I felt something else, pride in my foresight, and my quiet strength in my ability to protect myself while he underestimated me. The final divorce hearing painted a very different picture from Mark's imagined triumph. Gone was his cocky attitude, replaced by barely concealed panic. Melissa was noticeably absent. She'd moved on to a co-worker, her own age according to office gossip. Mark had shown up in his old clothes. The designer wardrobe apparently returned to help repay the joint account. He'd emptied. His lawyer looked tired, probably from trying to find loopholes in my documented separation of assets. Your Honor, Mark's lawyer attempted one last time. Despite the separate property documentation my client contributed to the growth of his wife's business through moral support, my lawyer interrupted like these text messages belittling. Mrs. Harrison's business as a little shop, or Thies' social media posts calling at her hobby, the judge had clearly seen enough the final settlement reflected my careful planning. I kept my house, my business, and my separate assets. Mark got his personal possessions. And his car, which was worthless than he owed on it. "You've destroyed me," he hissed as we left the courthouse. "I'll have to move back in with my parents." "No, Mark. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure you couldn't destroy me too." His mother was waiting, outside, ready to drive him to her house. His new home, at 45. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd mocked my age was now living in his childhood bedroom while I continued running my successful business. "You planned send this all along," he accused. "You knew this would happen." "No, I just paid attention, and unlike you, I understood the value of keeping good records." His mother stepped between us. "That's enough, Mark. You've embarrassed yourself enough already." As they walked away, I heard her start in on him. "Honestly, what were you thinking? Oh, 20-year-old emptying bank accounts, sending those horrible texts. I watched them disappear into the parking lot, feeling nothing but relief." Mark had thought he was writing the ending to our story with that cruel text. Instead, he'd merely set my carefully laid PL hands in motion. My phone buzzed, not with texts from Mark this time, but with notifications of new orders from my boutique's website. Life was moving forward, just not in the direction he'd imagined. Part 3. Segment 1, 600 words. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my boutique had expanded to a second location. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Mark struggled to rebuild his life, the little shop he dismissed was thriving. I'd hired 3 new employees and launched an online store that was gaining traction. An alley news of Mark's situation trickled back through mutual acquaintances. He tried dating apps, but found women his age weren't interested in a middle-aged man living with his parents. Younger women, having heard about his history through office gossip, steered clear. Melissa had apparently warned her friends about him sharing screenshots of his desperate attempts to win her back. After she'd left his career, suffered too the company's. HR department had launched an investigation into his relationship with a subordinate, resulting in a formal reprimand. The promotion he'd been expecting went to someone else, someone who didn't have a history of inappropriate relationships with reception staff. He tried to claim age discrimination, Amanda told me, during an unexpected visit to the boutique. Said they were punishing him for dating someone younger. HR just added that complaint to his file. I was surprised to see his sister in my store, but her presence spoke volumes about how thoroughly Mark had alienated his own family. "I know we didn't support you at first," she admitted, running her fingers over a silk scarf. He played the victim so well. But watching how he handled everything, how he acted afterward, I'm ashamed we ever believed him. My lawyer kept me updated on Mark's continued attempts to challenge the divorce settlement. Each petition was denied, his claims of unfair distribution dismissed based on the evidence of his own actions. He actually tried arguing that his text about emptying the account was just a joke, she told me, laughing. The judge asked if maid theft less illegal. The boutique's success brought unexpected validation. Local business magazines wanted to feature my story not as a scorned wife, but as a savvy businesswoman who protected her interests. Young entrepreneurs asked for advice about keeping business and personal finances separate. "The best protection is preparation," I told one young woman who reminded me of Melissa, and always trust your instincts. Mark's mother called occasionally, usually after he'd done something particularly self-destructive. He tried online gambling, hoping for a quick fix to his financial problems. He'd gotten involved with a pyramid scheme that promised fast returns. Each attempt to recover his former lifestyle just dug him deeper into trouble. "I don't know where we went wrong with him," she sighed during one call. His father and I offered to help him get back on his feet if he'd just take responsibility for his actions, but he's still blaming everyone else. "You, Melissa, his company." The judge, I listened politely but maintained my distance. Their family drama wasn't my problem anymore. My life had moved forward, filled with plans for a third boutique location and a possible expansion into luxury accessories. The only reminder of Mark's impact on my life was a frame screenshot hanging in my office. His final text before I blocked his number: "Have fun with your little shop at least. It keep you busy in your old age." Below it sat my latest business award proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms. 1 year after the divorce, I hosted a grand opening for my third boutique location. The event attracted local media and Thestry. They wanted to tell wasn't about my failed marriage. It was about a successful businesswoman expanding her brand. Mark's betrayal had become a mere footnote in my success story. During the event, Melissa unexpectedly walked in. She looked younger than ever. Or maybe I just felt that much stronger. She shifted uncomfortably, clutching her purse. Like Ash Shield, "I owe you an apology," she said. Quietly, "I believed everything he told me about how you were cold, controlling, how you didn't support his dreams. Then I watched him try the same manipulation tactics on me when things got tough. I continued arranging a display of designer sunglasses. Those weren't his dreams, Melissa. They were escapes. There's a difference. I know that now." She paused, then added, "He tried to move. In When You Froze, the accounts thought my studio apartment would be temporary. After 2 weeks of him complaining about the size of my closet and suggesting I take out a loan for a bigger place, I understood what you meant about the difference between dreams and escapes. I actually laughed at. That let me guess he had big plans, but no way to fund them exactly. Everything was going to work out once. His investments paid off once he got that promotion. Once his cryptocurrency definitely increased in value." She shook her head. "I'm dating someone my own age. Now we have student loans in a small apartment, but at least we're building something real." After she left, my assistant manager whispered, "Was that the girlfriend?" "No," I replied. "That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did." Speaking of lessons, I gestured to a young couple examining our designer handbags. "Let's talk about your idea for expanding our accessories line." The boutique had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of independence, of resilience, of the power of preparation. Young entrepreneurs often sought my advice, and I always emphasized the importance of protecting their assets. Mark's mother called one last time, not to discuss Mark, but to thank me. "You taught our family an important lesson," she said, "about enabling bad behavior, about making excuses for cruelty." Mark's still living at home, still blaming everyone else for his problems, but we're not defending him anymore. That's your legacy to our family, showing us the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. I thought about that legacy as I reviewed plans for a fourth location. Mark had intended to diminish me, to trade me in for a younger model, and take half of everything I built. Instead, he'd inadvertently pushed me to become even stronger, more successful. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Mark filed another petition to revisit the settlement. Judge dismissed it immediately and ordered him to pay court costs. "Thought you'd enjoy that," I smiled, thinking of him in his childhood bedroom still, trying to rewrite an ending that had been determined the moment he underestimated me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better. 2 years after Mark's cruel text message, I received an invitation to speak at a women's business conference. The topic wasn't divorce or betrayal. It was about building and prodding a successful business. My story had evolved from cautionary tale to inspiration. During the Q&A session, a woman asked about keeping business and personal finances separate. "My husband says I'm being paranoid, that marriage means sharing everything." My ex-husband said the same thing, I replied, right up until he tried to claim half my business in our divorce. "Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia." The boutique chain had grown to 5 locations, each more successful than the last. The little shop Mark had mocked now employed 30 people and had been featured in several national magazines. Through mutual friends, I heard Mark had finally moved out of his parents' house into a small apartment above a garage. He'd had to take a lower-paying job after his former company downsized, eliminating his position during restructuring. His dating profile still listed him as young at heart, though his profile photo was clearly outdated. Melissa, ironically, had become a regular customer at my original boutique location. She'd earned her business degree and started her own social media consulting company. "You inspired me," she told me once, showing how a woman can build something lasting. Instead of falling for empty promises, I kept Mark's cruel text message framed in my office. not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far I'd come below. It hung a sign that read, "Success is the best revenge at the 5-year anniversary celebration of my original boutique." I stood addressing my employees and loyal customers. The space had been transformed from a single little shop into the flagship store of a thriving business empire. Mark's mother attended, though I hadn't sent her an invitation. She waited until the crowd thinned to approach me. "I saw Mark yesterday," she said, smoothing her designer dress, one she'd bought from my store.